The assignment seemed simple enough when Commander Vexthor handed me the datapad. As a xenobiologist for the Galactic Council, I had observed dozens of species in various situations. War Peace Celebration morning, I thought I had seen everything the universe had to offer. The humans were newcomers to the galactic stage, having only achieved faster-than-light travel 3 cycles ago. They were small, physically unremarkable, and their technology was primitive compared to most council races. The general consensus was that they would serve as suitable laborers or merchants, nothing more. My name is Krilmara, and I belong to the Zenthari Collective, a race known for our analytical minds and emotional stability. We feel emotions, but they are muted, controlled. It makes us perfect observers. We document without bias, record without sentiment. That's why I was chosen for this particular mission. The humans had entered a conflict with the Drokan Empire, an aggressive species that had been violating border treaties for years. The Council wanted to see how humans handled warfare before granting them full membership. I boarded my stealth observation vessel with confidence. The ship was equipped with the best cloaking technology available, completely undetectable to both human and Drokan sensors. My mission was to embed myself near a human military unit, observe their combat tactics, psychological resilience, and decision-making processes under pressure. Standard procedure. I had done this 17 times before with other species. I expected the humans would either surrender quickly or fight with the clumsy desperation of primitives. The human vessel I chose to shadow was called the UHSF Defiant, a mid-sized warship with a crew of 300. Nothing impressive about its design. Functional, utilitarian, built from steel alloys and basic composite materials. I positioned my observation ship within 200 meters, my sensors recording everything. The crew went about their duties with practiced efficiency. They laughed, they complained about food, they showed pictures of their families. So normal, so unremarkable. The first engagement happened in the Tertius system, near a human colony world. 3 Drokan warships emerged from hyperspace, their weapons hot and ready. The Drokan were known across the galaxy as brutal warriors. They stood nearly 3 meters tall, with armored hides that could withstand small arms fire. Their ships were heavily armed, their tactics refined through centuries of conquest. I had observed them destroy a Pelthian fleet in under an hour once. The humans were outnumbered and outgunned. I expected the Defiant to retreat. Any rational species would have. Instead, the human captain, a woman named Sarah Chen, gave the order to engage. I checked my translation matrix, certain I had misunderstood, but no, she had clearly ordered her ship to attack. The bridge crew didn't question the order. They simply moved to execute it with frightening speed. I began recording every detail, fascinated by what I assumed would be a brief and tragic display of human foolishness. What happened next contradicted everything I knew about warfare. The Defiant didn't charge in recklessly. Instead, it maneuvered with precision that seemed impossible for such a crude vessel. The humans used the debris field from a destroyed station as cover, angles of approach that my tactical computer initially labeled as suicidal. They fired their weapons with careful timing, not wasting a single shot. Each missile, each railgun round had a purpose. But it was more than just competent tactics. There was something else, something I couldn't quite identify at first. One of the Drokan ships scored a direct hit on the Defiant's port side. I watched the explosion tear through 3 decks, saw the structural integrity alarms flash red across my monitors. 27 humans died instantly, sucked out into space through the breach. I had seen death before many times. It was simply a fact of observation. But something about the captain's face caught my attention. Her jaw tightened for exactly 2 seconds. That was all. Then she was back to giving orders, her voice steady. The remaining crew didn't panic. There was no chaos, no breakdown of discipline. The survivors in the damaged section sealed bulkheads, rerouted power, and returned to their stations. Within 4 minutes, that section of the ship was combat-ready again, if barely. I noted this with academic interest. Good training, certainly, but not unprecedented. What came next, however, would haunt me. The Defiant's weapons officer, a young man barely into his 3rd decade, locked onto one of the Drokan ships with their main cannon. The Drokan vessel was positioned behind a civilian transport that had been captured earlier, using it as a shield. By all rules of warfare established by the Council, the humans should have broken off. Civilian casualties are unacceptable, especially when those civilians belong to a neutral third party. I prepared to note this war crime in my report, but Captain Chen didn't fire. Instead, she opened a communication channel. I listened as she spoke to the Drokan commander in their own language, which surprised me. She told them she was giving them one chance to release the civilian vessel. The Drokan commander laughed, a harsh grinding sound, and refused. He said humans were weak, that their sentimentality would be their downfall. He called them prey animals playing at being warriors. The captain closed the channel. She turned to her crew and said something that made my skin crawl, though I couldn't explain why at the time. She said, "They think mercy is weakness. Let's show them what happens when we stop being merciful." Her voice was cold, colder than the void of space around us. The crew nodded, and I saw something in their eyes that I had never seen before. Not anger, not hatred, something far more terrifying. Purpose. What the humans did next was technically brilliant but strategically insane. They launched a boarding party. 16 humans in powered armor, crossing open space under fire, heading directly for the Drokan ship. I watched them breach the hull with plasma cutters, disappear inside. My sensors couldn't penetrate the Drokan ship's interior, but I could track life signs. Drokan signatures began disappearing one by one with mechanical efficiency. The boarding party was cutting through trained Drokan warriors like they were nothing. 20 minutes later, the civilian transport was released, its crew unharmed. The boarding party returned with 3 minutes of oxygen remaining in their suits. They had cleared an entire Drokan warship with only 16 soldiers and had suffered 2 casualties. As they climbed back aboard the Defiant, I realized I was feeling something unfamiliar. My hands were shaking slightly as I recorded my observations. The Zinthari don't shake. We don't feel fear, not like this. But watching those humans fight, seeing the calculated violence they were capable of, something had shifted inside me. The assignment seemed simple enough when Commander Vexthor handed me the data pad. As a xenobiologist for the Galactic Council, I had observed dozens of species in various situations. War, peace, celebration, mourning. I thought I had seen everything the universe had to offer. The humans were newcomers to the galactic stage, having only achieved faster-than-light travel 3 cycles ago. They were small, physically unremarkable, and their technology was primitive compared to most Council races. The general consensus was that they would serve as suitable laborers or merchants. Nothing more. My name is Krill Mara, and I belong to the Zinthari Collective, a race known for our analytical minds and emotional stability. We feel emotions, but they are muted, controlled. It makes us perfect observers. We document without bias, record without sentiment. That's why I was chosen for this particular mission. The humans had entered a conflict with the Drokan Empire, an aggressive species that had been violating border treaties for years. The Council wanted to see how humans handled warfare before granting them full membership. I boarded my stealth observation vessel with confidence. The ship was equipped with the best cloaking technology available, completely undetectable to both human and Drokan sensors. My mission was to embed myself near a human military unit, observe their combat tactics, psychological resilience, and decision-making processes under pressure. Standard procedure. I had done this 17 times before with other species. I expected the humans would either surrender quickly or fight with the clumsy desperation of primitives. The human vessel I chose to shadow was called the UHSF Defiant, a mid-sized warship with a crew of 300. Nothing impressive about its design. Functional, utilitarian, built from steel alloys and basic composite materials. I positioned my observation ship within 200 meters, my sensors recording everything. The crew went about their duties with practiced efficiency. They laughed, they complained about food, they showed pictures of their families. So normal, so unremarkable. The first engagement happened in the Tertia system near a human colony world. 3 Drokan warships emerged from hyperspace, their weapons hot and ready. The Drokan were known across the galaxy as brutal warriors. They stood nearly 3 meters tall, with armored hides that could withstand small arms fire. Their ships were heavily armed, their tactics refined through centuries of conquest. I had observed them destroy a Pelthian fleet in under an hour once. The humans were outnumbered and outgunned. I expected the Defiant to retreat. Any rational species would have. Instead, the human captain, a woman named Sarah Chen, gave the order to engage. I checked my translation matrix, certain I had misunderstood. But no, she had clearly ordered her ship to attack. The bridge crew didn't question the order. They simply moved to execute it with frightening speed. I began recording every detail, fascinated by what I assumed would be a brief and tragic display of human foolishness. What happened next contradicted everything I knew about warfare. The Defiant didn't charge in recklessly. Instead, it maneuvered with precision that seemed impossible for such a crude vessel. The humans used the debris field from a destroyed station as cover, angles of approach that my tactical computer initially labeled as suicidal. They fired their weapons with careful timing, not wasting a single shot. Each missile, each railgun round had a purpose, but it was more than just competent tactics. There was something else, something I couldn't quite identify at first. One of the Drokan ships scored a direct hit on the Defiant's port side. I watched the explosion tear through 3 decks, saw the structural integrity alarms flash red across my monitors. 27 humans died instantly, sucked out into space through the breach. I had seen death before many times. It was simply a fact of observation. But something about the captain's face caught my attention. Her jaw tightened for exactly 2 seconds. That was all. Then she was back to giving orders, her voice steady. The remaining crew didn't panic. There was no chaos, no breakdown of discipline. The survivors in the damaged section sealed bulkheads, rerouted power, and returned to their stations. Within 4 minutes, that section of the ship was combat-ready again, if barely. I noted this with academic interest. Good training, certainly, but not unprecedented. What came next, however, would haunt me. The Defiant's weapons officer, a young man barely into his 3rd decade, locked onto one of the Drokan ships with their main cannon. The Drokan vessel was positioned behind a civilian transport that had been captured earlier, using it as a shield. By all rules of warfare established by the Council, the humans should have broken off. Civilian casualties are unacceptable, especially when those civilians belong to a neutral third party. I prepared to note this war crime in my report, but Captain Chen didn't fire. Instead, she opened a communication channel. I listened as she spoke to the Drokan commander in their own language, which surprised me. She told them she was giving them one chance to release the civilian vessel. The Drokan commander laughed, a harsh grinding sound, and refused. He said humans were weak, that their sentimentality would be their downfall. He called them prey animals playing at being warriors. The captain closed the channel. She turned to her crew and said something that made my skin crawl, though I couldn't explain why at the time. She said, "They think mercy is weakness. Let's show them what happens when we stop being merciful." Her voice was cold, colder than the void of space around us. The crew nodded, and I saw something in their eyes that I had never seen before. Not anger, not hatred, something far more terrifying. Purpose. The battle continued for 6 more hours. I watched, unable to look away, as the Defiant systematically dismantled the Drokan attack force. What disturbed me most wasn't the violence itself. I had observed violent species before. The Kraharn literally ate their enemies alive. The Vosk turned warfare into a religious ritual, but human violence was different. It was surgical, purposeful, and somehow personal all at once. During a brief lull in the fighting, I focused my sensors on the crew quarters. I needed to understand what kind of beings could fight like this. What I found confused me further. In one room, a group of humans were playing some sort of card game, laughing at jokes I didn't understand. In another, a woman was writing a letter to her daughter, tears streaming down her face as she described how much she missed home. In the medical bay, doctors worked frantically to save the wounded, talking softly to comfort patients in pain. These were the same humans who had just boarded an enemy warship and killed trained warriors with their bare hands when their weapons ran empty. I had been taught that species fell into categories: predators or prey, aggressive or peaceful, logical or emotional. Humans seemed to be all of these things simultaneously, switching between states so rapidly that my analysis programs couldn't keep up. How could the same individual who wept over a letter one moment become an efficient killing machine the next? It violated every psychological model I had studied. The second Drokan ship made a critical mistake. It targeted the human colony below, launching missiles toward civilian population centers. I calculated that approximately 40,000 humans would die in the strike. This was actually a common tactic in warfare. Destroy the enemy's will to fight by threatening what they value. Most species would either surrender at this point or become paralyzed by the need to defend their civilians. The humans did neither. Captain Chen's expression didn't change. She simply redirected all power to engines and weapons. The Defiant accelerated beyond what should have been safe limits. I could hear the hull groaning through my sensors, see the stress fractures forming in the support structures. The ship was literally tearing itself apart, but it moved fast enough to intercept 7 of the 10 missiles. The human point defense systems destroyed them before they could reach the planet. 3 missiles got through. I watched those 3 impacts, watched the explosions blossom across the colony's surface, watched the death toll climb on my monitors. 8,432 humans died. I recorded their life signs disappearing one after another in the span of seconds. It was data, numbers. This was supposed to be academic, so why were my hands shaking again? The Defiance crew saw it too. Their colony, their people be. What the humans did next was technically brilliant but strategically insane. They launched a boarding party. 16 humans in powered armor, crossing open space under fire, heading directly for the Droken ship. I watched them breach the hull with plasma cutters, disappear inside. My sensors couldn't penetrate the Drokan ship's interior, but I could track life signs. Droken signatures began disappearing one by one with mechanical efficiency. The boarding party was cutting through trained Droken warriors like they were nothing. 20 minutes later, the civilian transport was released, its crew unharmed. The boarding party returned with 3 minutes of oxygen remaining in their suits. They had cleared an entire Drokan warship with only 16 soldiers, and had suffered 2 casualties. As they climbed back aboard the Defiant, I realized I was feeling something unfamiliar. My hands were shaking slightly as I recorded my 3 weeks passed before the Defiant returned to active duty. I maintained my observation position throughout the repair period, documenting everything. The human shipyard was a chaotic place by Xanthari standards. Workers moved with purpose, but without the orderly precision I was accustomed to seeing. They talked constantly, argued about methods, and somehow still completed tasks ahead of schedule. Efficiency born from disorder, another contradiction. I watched Captain Chen during this time as well. She visited every wounded crew member in the hospital, spending hours talking with them. She attended memorials for those who had died, standing silent and rigid while families wept. But in her private quarters, when she thought no one was watching, she would sit at her desk and stare at the list of casualties. Just stare at it for hours sometimes, her face expressionless. I didn't understand this behavior. The dead were dead. Mourning wouldn't change that. Yet she seemed compelled to witness their names, to carry the weight of their deaths alone in the darkness. During the repairs, I also monitored human communication networks. I needed to understand how their society viewed warfare, what cultural context produced soldiers like those I had observed. What I found disturbed me more than the battle itself. Humans hated war. Their literature, their art, their music, all of it screamed against the violence and waste of combat. They created memorials for the fallen, wrote poetry about the tragedy of young lives ended too soon, and actively worked toward peace in every conflict. Yet these same beings who mourned violence so deeply were also incredibly, terrifyingly effective at conducting it. They studied warfare with the same intensity they studied medicine or art. They created detailed manuals on how to kill efficiently, how to destroy enemies completely, how to wage war on scales that made other species uncomfortable. It was like watching someone who hated fire become the galaxy's greatest expert on combustion. The contradiction made my head ache. The Defiant's next assignment took them to the border regions where Droken raids had intensified. Apparently the Empire hadn't learned their lesson, or perhaps they had learned it too well and were now seeking revenge. Either way, Human Command decided to send the Defiant as part of a small fleet to discourage further incursions. I followed, my stealth ship still undetected, my mission to observe still active. The human fleet consisted of 5 ships total. Small by galactic standards, the Drokan force they encountered numbered 15 vessels, including 2 of their heavy battlecruisers. I ran the tactical calculations immediately. The humans were outnumbered 3 to 1, facing superior firepower and armor. Retreat was the only logical option. I prepared to record the human withdrawal, already forming the conclusions I would include in my report about their limitations. Admiral Zhao, the human fleet commander, opened communication channels with all ships. I listened to his speech, expecting some desperate rallying cry or false bravado. Instead, he spoke calmly about their tactical situation, acknowledged they were outmatched, and then said something that still echoes in my mind. He said, "They think we'll run. They think we're afraid." Let's show them that humans don't run when others need protecting. Behind the human fleet was a convoy of refugee ships, civilians fleeing other Droken attacks. The human fleet was all that stood between those refugees and certain death. What followed wasn't a battle. It was a demonstration of human tactical thinking that rewrote my understanding of warfare. The 5 human ships didn't engage the Droken fleet head-on. Instead, they scattered, moving in seemingly random patterns. The Droken commander laughed over open channels, mocking the humans for their cowardice and disorganization. He divided his fleet to pursue the scattered human ships, confident in his numerical superiority. That was his mistake. The humans had scattered into a pattern, one I didn't recognize until it was too late. Each human ship positioned itself at a precise location, forming a 3-dimensional web across the battlefield. When the Droken ships moved into pursuit, they found themselves isolated, cut off from support by the human positioning. Suddenly, the 15 Droken ships weren't a unified fleet anymore. They were 15 individual targets, each facing concentrated fire from multiple directions. The Defiant drew 3 Droken ships into pursuit, leading them into a debris field left over from some ancient battle. Captain Chen maneuvered through the wreckage like she had memorized every piece, while the larger Droken ships struggled to follow. One clipped an old satellite and lost its port stabilizer. Another got tangled in debris and had to slow down. The third maintained pursuit but found itself isolated, separated from its support fleet. Then the Defiant stopped running. It spun around with thrusters firing at maximum, faced its pursuer and opened fire with everything it had. The Droken ship, expecting the chase to continue, wasn't prepared for the sudden reversal. Human weapons tore into its forward shields, collapsing them. Follow-up strikes damaged the bridge and weapons arrays. In the span of 90 seconds, the Droken ship went from hunter to crippled prey. I watched similar scenarios play out across the battlefield. Human ships turning on their pursuers at precise moments, exploiting momentary vulnerabilities with ruthless efficiency. The humans were using their smaller size and superior maneuverability to offset the Droken advantages in armor and firepower. It was brilliant. It was also exhausting to watch. Each human ship was operating at the absolute edge of its capabilities, every pilot and weapons officer performing perfectly under enormous pressure. Then something went wrong. One of the human ships, the UHSF Valiant, took a direct hit from a Droken battlecruiser's main cannon. The entire front section of the ship simply ceased to exist, vaporized by the energy discharge. I watched 87 human life signs disappear from my sensors instantly. The Valiant began tumbling, its engines dead. Life support failing in multiple sections. It was finished, a derelict waiting to be destroyed or captured. The Droken battlecruiser moved in for the kill, its commander broadcasting victory messages. But he hadn't accounted for human stubbornness. The Valiant's captain, somehow still alive in the intact rear section of the ship, redirected all remaining power to a single system. Not weapons, not shields, not even life support. He powered up their faster-than-light drive, the massive engines that normally required careful calculation and preparation to engage safely. I realized what he was doing a moment before it happened. He was going to ram the battlecruiser at faster-than-light velocities. The physics alone should have made this impossible. FTL drives don't work that close to a gravity well or another ship's mass. They require specific conditions, careful alignment. But the human captain didn't care about what should or shouldn't work. He fired the drive anyway, and somehow, impossibly, it engaged. The Valiant accelerated to faster-than-light speed for exactly 0.7 seconds before its drive tore itself apart. But 0.7 seconds was enough. The ship, or what remained of it, struck the Droken battlecruiser at a significant fraction of light speed. The resulting explosion registered on sensors across 3 star systems. When the energy dissipated, both ships were gone. Just debris and radiation remained. 133 humans had been on the Valiant. They traded their lives for 800 Droken warriors and one of the Empire's most powerful warships. The sacrifice stunned the Droken fleet. They had never seen anything like it. Most species value survival above victory. Most commanders would have ordered evacuation, tried to save their crew. But the human captain had calculated the tactical situation and made a choice that would haunt me for cycles to come. He had decided that stopping that battlecruiser was worth every life on his ship, including his own. and his crew had followed that decision without question or hesitation. The remaining Drokan ships lost their coordination after that. They had seen the lengths humans would go to, the prices they were willing to pay. When Admiral Zhao offered them terms of withdrawal, they accepted immediately. The battle had lasted 4 hours. The humans had lost one ship completely and suffered heavy damage to 2 others, but they had held the line. The refugee convoy escaped to safety, carrying 20,000 civilians who would have died otherwise. I tried to calculate the strategic value of those refugees against the cost in human lives. My analysis programs couldn't find a favorable ratio. The refugees were mostly elderly and children, not warriors or workers. They had limited economic value and no military worth. By any logical assessment, the human fleet should have retreated, preserved their assets, and accepted the refugee losses as unfortunate but necessary. Instead, they had fought a numerically superior force and lost 133 trained military personnel to save civilians who contributed little to the war effort. It made no sense. It violated every principle of rational resource management. Yet as I watched the surviving human crews celebrate their victory, as I saw Admiral Zhao personally contact each refugee ship to assure them of their safety, I realized that human logic operated on principles I didn't understand. They assigned value differently, calculated costs in ways my species never had, and somehow, despite the apparent illogic of their choices, they kept winning. The Drokan Empire's response came 2 months later. They sent an entire battle group, 30 ships including 3 dreadnoughts. Their target was the human colony world of New Terra, home to 3 million civilians. The Empire had apparently decided that humans needed to be taught a permanent lesson about challenging Drokan supremacy. I received the intelligence reports at the same time as Human Command. My sensors intercepted their communications easily enough. Human Command faced an impossible decision. New Terra's defenses consisted of a single orbital station and a small patrol fleet, maybe 8 ships total. Nothing that could stand against 30 Drokan warships. Evacuation would take weeks they didn't have. Reinforcements wouldn't arrive in time. By every logical assessment, New Terra was doomed. I expected the humans to focus on evacuating key personnel and military assets, accepting the loss as unavoidable. Instead, Admiral Zhao assembled every available ship. 22 vessels in total, pulled from patrols, training exercises, and repair docks. Some weren't even fully combat-ready. The UHSF Darwin was missing half its armor plating. The UHSF Endeavour had engines that only worked at 70% capacity. One ship, the UHSF Phoenix, was technically still under construction and had civilian contractors still aboard. They all went anyway. I followed the fleet to New Terra, positioning my observation ship in a high orbit where I could monitor the entire engagement. The human ships arrived 3 days before the Drokan fleet. Those 3 days revealed something about humans I hadn't fully appreciated before. They prepared, not just militarily but psychologically and emotionally. They said goodbye to families, recorded messages for children, made peace with their probable deaths. They did all of this calmly, methodically, like checking items off a list. Captain Chen spent her 3 days walking the Defiance corridors, talking with every crew member personally. I listened to these conversations through my sensors. She didn't give speeches about glory or duty. Instead, she listened to them talk about their lives, their fears, their hopes for after the war. She told them honestly that they probably wouldn't survive the coming battle. And then she thanked them for coming anyway. Every single crew member chose to stay. Not one requested transfer or evacuation. The night before the battle, I observed something that would change my understanding of humanity forever. The crew of the Defiant gathered in their common areas and they sang. Not war songs or military anthems. They sang about home, about love, about green fields under blue skies. They sang with tears running down their faces, knowing they would likely die tomorrow. And between songs, they laughed. They told jokes, shared memories, held each other. They were saying goodbye to life itself, and they did it together. I had observed death rituals across dozens of species. The Krentak faced death with stoic silence. The Ythera entered meditative trances. The Vorqueen became violent, raging against the inevitable. But humans faced death by celebrating life, by remembering everything beautiful they had experienced, by connecting with each other one last time. It was simultaneously the saddest and most beautiful thing I had ever witnessed. The Drokan fleet arrived exactly on schedule. dropping out of hyperspace in perfect formation. 30 warships, their weapons hot, their shields at maximum. The Drokan commander broadcast a message to New Terra, giving the colonists 1 hour to surrender unconditionally or be destroyed. Admiral Zhao responded by launching every ship in his fleet directly at the Drokan formation. 22 ships against 30. It looked like suicide. The first phase of the battle was brutal. The Drokan dreadnoughts opened fire with their main cannons, weapons powerful enough to crack a planet's crust. The human fleet scattered like seeds in wind. No longer maintaining any recognizable formation, ships dove and weaved through the incoming fire, losing shields, taking damage, but somehow staying in the fight. 3 human ships died in the first 10 minutes, simply overwhelmed by the volume of fire. I recorded their deaths, watching crews of hundreds reduced to expanding clouds of debris. But the surviving human ships kept coming, kept fighting, kept refusing to break. They were using every trick they had learned, every tactic they had developed. They launched missiles that looked like ships and ships that looked like missiles, confusing Drokan targeting systems. They used the planet's gravity well to slingshot into attack runs that seemed to violate physics. They coordinated their fire with split-second timing, multiple ships striking the same target simultaneously to overwhelm its shields. Captain Chen led a group of 5 ships in a maneuver that my tactical computer initially classified as impossible. They flew directly through the Drokan formation, weapons firing in all directions, moving so fast that the Drokan ships couldn't track them properly. It was like watching a school of fish swim through a group of sharks, except these fish had teeth and knew how to use them. 2 more Drokan ships fell to this attack run, their reactors going critical after concentrated fire breached their cores. Then I noticed something odd in the human communications. They were using old-fashioned radio signals, unencrypted, easily intercepted. They were talking about their tactics openly, discussing their vulnerabilities, even sharing their ammunition counts. It made no sense to broadcast this information where the enemy could hear it. Unless that was the point. Unless they wanted the Drokan to hear specific information. The Drokan commander took the bait. Hearing that several human ships were low on missiles, he redirected his forces to target those vessels first, seeing an opportunity to eliminate weakened enemies. His fleet adjusted its formation, creating small gaps in their defensive coverage. Gaps that wouldn't matter against the supposedly depleted human ships. Gaps that were exactly the right size for the New Terra orbital station to target with its heavy weapons. The station had been silent throughout the battle, powering down its weapons, playing dead. Now it opened fire with every cannon it possessed, exploiting the gaps in the Drokan formation with surgical precision. 2 Drokan battleships died before they could react, their shields focused in the wrong direction. The human ships that were supposedly low on ammunition suddenly had plenty, launching fresh volleys that caught the confused Drokan fleet from multiple angles. It was a trap. The entire engagement had been designed to manipulate the Drokan commander into a specific formation, to make him think he understood the tactical situation. The humans had been playing a game 3 moves ahead, sacrificing advantages to create a killing zone. And it worked. 6 Drokan ships destroyed in the span of 5 minutes, their formations broken, their coordination shattered. But the victory came at a terrible cost. 8 human ships had died creating the conditions for the trap. Over 2,000 crew members had sacrificed themselves to make the strategy work. I watched Admiral Zhao's face on the communication channels. He showed no satisfaction, no joy in the tactical success. Only grief, only the weight of the lives spent to achieve it. Yet he kept giving orders, kept directing the battle, because stopping meant those deaths would be meaningless. The Drokan fleet tried to regroup, but the humans pressed their advantage mercilessly. They had learned the Drokan patterns, understood their tactics. Every time the Empire's ships tried to establish a defensive formation, human vessels would strike from unexpected angles, disrupt the organization, keep them off balance. It was exhausting to watch. Both fleets were operating at their absolute limits, crews working until they collapsed from fatigue, equipment pushed beyond safe parameters. Then one of the Drokan dreadnoughts broke through the human lines. It accelerated toward New Terra, intending to bombard the planet directly. If it reached firing range, millions would die within minutes. Every human ship in range tried to intercept, but they were too far away, too slow. The dreadnought would reach its firing position before they could stop it. The UHSF Phoenix, The ship that was still technically under construction suddenly changed course. It was the closest vessel, but also the least armed. Against a dreadnought, it stood no chance. The civilian contractors aboard had been working frantically throughout the battle, trying to finish installing weapons systems and armor plating. Now their voice came over the communications channel, a woman named Sarah Rodriguez asking Captain Chen for a favor. She asked Chen to tell her daughter she loved her. Then she cut off communication and aimed the Phoenix directly at the dreadnought. I realized immediately what she intended. The Phoenix might not have weapons powerful enough to hurt a dreadnought, but its reactor was online and running hot from the frantic construction work. A reactor makes an excellent bomb if you know how to overload it properly. The Phoenix accelerated, its incomplete engines straining, pieces of unfinished hull plating tearing away from the stress. The Droken dreadnought fired on it, but the Phoenix was small and fast enough to evade most of the incoming fire. It took hits, lost sections of itself, but kept coming. Inside, Sarah Rodriguez and her team of contractors worked on overloading the reactor, knowing they had minutes at best before the ship came apart around them. They made it. The Phoenix struck the dreadnought's port side and its reactor. The battle lasted 14 hours total. When it finally ended, 9 human ships remained operational out of the original 22. The Drokan fleet had been reduced to 7 vessels, all heavily damaged, all retreating at maximum speed. New Terra was safe, its 3 million inhabitants spared from destruction. The cost had been over 4,000 human lives. I recorded every death, every explosion, every moment of the engagement. Data, numbers, facts. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The victory celebrations on New Terra were muted. Yes, people were grateful to be alive, but they knew the price that had been paid. I watched through my sensors as the surviving ships limped back to orbit, their hulls scarred and broken. The crews didn't celebrate. They were too exhausted, too traumatized, too aware of the empty bunks and silent corridors where their friends had been. Captain Chen barely spoke during the return journey. She stood on her bridge, staring at the casualty reports, and I saw something in her expression that I had no words for. I should have returned to the Zinthari Collective at that point. I had observed multiple engagements, gathered extensive data on human combat capabilities. My mission was complete. The Council would want my report, but I couldn't leave. Something about the humans had gotten inside my mind. Under my analytical detachment, I needed to understand what drove them, what made them capable of such sacrifice. So I continued following the Defiant, watching, recording, trying to comprehend. The human military gave the survivors 2 weeks of leave. Most went home to their families. Captain Chen went to visit the families of her fallen crew members. I observed from a distance as she traveled to dozens of homes across multiple worlds, personally delivering the news, personally explaining how each person had died. She could have sent messages or delegated the task, but she went herself, faced the grief and anger and pain that her decisions had caused. In one home, a mother screamed at her, blamed her for a son's death. Chen stood there and took it, didn't defend herself, didn't try to justify the mission. She just listened, let the woman's rage wash over her, and then quietly told her that her son had died saving 800 civilians trapped in a damaged transport. The mother collapsed and Chen held her while she wept. I watched this scene and felt something crack inside my carefully maintained emotional controls. During this leave period, I also investigated human culture more deeply. I accessed their historical databases, studied their wars, their art, their philosophy. What I found terrified me. Humans had been at war with themselves for their entire recorded history. They had developed weapons capable of destroying their own planet multiple times over. They had committed atrocities that made Drokan raids look tame by comparison. They knew what war truly was because they had inflicted it upon themselves for thousands of years. But they had also spent those same thousands of years trying to stop. Every major human culture had philosophers and teachers who preached peace. Their religious texts spoke of forgiveness and mercy. Their greatest leaders were often those who had prevented wars rather than won them. Humans simultaneously understood violence better than almost any species in the galaxy, and hated it more deeply than I could comprehend. They were experts in destruction who dreamed of peace. This contradiction was the key to understanding them. They didn't fight because they loved war. They fought because they had learned through centuries of suffering that sometimes violence was the only response to violence. They had refined warfare into a terrible art form not out of joy but out of grim necessity, and they carried the psychological weight of every battle, every death, every necessary evil they committed. It was slowly destroying them from the inside, but they kept doing it anyway. I began having nightmares during my rest cycles. The Zinthari don't dream, not like humans do. Our sleep is peaceful, restorative, empty. But now I was experiencing vivid, recurring images. The Valiant ramming the battlecruiser, Sarah Rodriguez piloting the Phoenix into the dreadnought, the mother screaming at Captain Chen, the colony burning, all of it playing over and over in my mind, refusing to leave me alone. I tried meditation techniques, pharmaceutical interventions, even consulted medical databases. Nothing helped. The Defiant's next mission came sooner than expected. The Droken Empire had withdrawn from human space but was now attacking a neutral species called the Pelthians. The Pelthians were peaceful traders, completely unprepared for military conflict. Their government sent desperate pleas to the Galactic Council for intervention. The council debated for weeks, forming committees discussing proper procedures. They were still talking when Drokan forces destroyed 2 Pelthian colony worlds, killing millions. Humans didn't wait for the council. Admiral Zhao assembled another fleet, smaller this time because they were still recovering from the New Terra battle. 12 ships, including the Defiant. They weren't defending human territory this time. They had no strategic interest in the Pelthian worlds. They went anyway because the Pelthians needed help and no one else was coming. This decision baffled me more than anything else I had witnessed. Captain Chen addressed her crew before departure. She explained that they didn't have to go, that this wasn't their fight, that no one would think less of them for refusing. Every single crew member volunteered. Some had barely finished medical treatment from the last battle. Others had families begging them not to go. They went anyway. When I tried to understand their reasoning, they gave answers that made no logical sense. They said things like, it's the right thing to do and we can't just let them die and someone has to help. The Pelthian system was 3 weeks away at maximum speed. During the journey, I observed the crew more closely than ever. They trained constantly, practiced combat drills until they moved with mechanical precision. But they also maintained their humanity. They played games, told stories, formed deeper bonds with each other. I noticed that soldiers who had served together through multiple battles moved almost as one mind during drills. They anticipated each other's actions, covered each other's vulnerabilities, fought as a single organism rather than individuals. One evening, I monitored a conversation in the crew mess hall. A young weapons officer named James Park was talking about his home, a place called Korea on Earth. He described mountains covered in autumn leaves, temples that had stood for thousands of years, food his grandmother made that he would never taste again. Other crew members shared similar memories. They were preparing themselves psychologically for death, cataloging the things they loved so they could carry those memories into whatever came next. Lieutenant Marcus Webb, the communications officer I had observed before, noticed Park's melancholy. He put a hand on the young man's shoulder and said something that has haunted me ever since. He said, "We remember the good things so we know what we're protecting. We face the bad things so others don't have to. That's what makes us human." The others nodded, understanding immediately. I didn't understand at all, but I recorded the statement and analyzed it repeatedly during my rest cycles. When we arrived at the Pelthian system, the situation was worse than reported. 5 Droken warships were in orbit around the primary colony world, preparing for a massive bombardment. Pelthian defense forces consisted of 2 patrol boats with weapons designed for pirates, not military vessels. It wasn't even a fair fight. It was an execution. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace already in battle formation, already accelerating toward the Droken ships. The Droken commander seemed surprised that humans had come to defend a species that wasn't even their ally. He broadcast a message asking why they would die for strangers. Admiral Zhao's response was simple and devastating. He said, "Because you're killing them and we're going to stop you." No grand speeches, no complicated geopolitics, just a statement of intent, delivered in a tone that promised absolute commitment. What followed was the most vicious battle I had observed yet. The Droken ships were prepared this time, had studied human tactics from previous engagements. They adapted their strategies, covered their vulnerabilities, fought with the awareness that humans were genuinely dangerous opponents. But they hadn't adapted enough. Couldn't adapt enough, Because human tactics weren't just about maneuvers and weapons. They were about commitment, about refusing to quit no matter what the cost. The Defiant took heavy fire early in the engagement. A Droken missile penetrated their point defenses and detonated against the engineering section. The explosion killed 19 crew members instantly and crippled the ship's main engines. By any reasonable standard, the Defiant was out of the fight. It couldn't maneuver, couldn't escape, could barely maintain orbit. Captain Chen should have ordered evacuation, tried to save the remaining crew. Instead, she ordered all remaining power diverted to weapons. The Defiant became a stationary gun platform anchored in space, pouring fire into any Drokan ship that came within range. It was a death sentence. Without engines, the ship couldn't dodge incoming fire. But it could shoot, and it did, drawing Drokan attention away from the other human vessels. Chen had turned her ship into bait, a wounded animal that the Drokan couldn't ignore, giving the rest of the fleet room to maneuver. I watched 2 Drokan ships close in on the Defiant, saw their weapons charging for killing shots. The crew knew what was coming. I heard them on internal communications saying goodbye to each other, some praying to various deities, others just holding hands in silence. They faced death with more courage than I thought possible. Then the UHSF Darwin and the UHSF Endeavour appeared from above and below the Defiant, their weapons already firing. They had risked their own ships to save Chen and her crew, inserting themselves between the Defiant and certain destruction. The 2 Drokan ships tried to adjust their targeting, but they were too close, moving too fast. Human weapons tore into them at point-blank range. One Drokan vessel lost containment on its reactor and exploded. The other tried to retreat but took critical damage to its propulsion systems. It drifted, helpless, and was destroyed by concentrated fire from 3 human ships. The Defiant survived, crippled but still fighting, still contributing fire to the battle even as its crew worked frantically on emergency repairs. The battle continued for 6 more hours. Both sides lost ships, took damage, bled crew members into the void. But the humans had something the Drokan didn't. They had a reason to fight that went beyond territorial expansion or military glory. They were protecting innocents, defending beings who couldn't defend themselves. That purpose gave them strength that pure military training never could. Every time a human ship took damage, the others moved to cover it. Every time casualties mounted, the survivors fought harder. When the last Drokan ship finally retreated, only 7 human vessels remained combat-capable. But the Pelthian colony was saved. 2 million Pelthian civilians were still alive because 12 human ships had traveled 3 weeks to fight a battle that wasn't theirs. The Pelthian government broadcast messages of gratitude, offered economic treaties, promised eternal friendship. The humans accepted the thanks politely but seemed uncomfortable with the praise. They had just done what they thought was right. Nothing more. I watched Captain Chen during the aftermath, saw her standing on her damaged bridge, looking at the casualty reports. 37 more crew members dead, over 100 wounded. Her ship was barely functional, would need months in a shipyard to be combat-ready again. She had achieved victory, saved millions of lives, and all I could see on her face was grief. She wasn't celebrating, she was mourning. Again, always mourning the cost of survival. That night I finally understood why I couldn't sleep anymore. The humans had taught me something my species had never learned. They had taught me to care about individuals, not just species or statistics. Every death I had recorded wasn't just data anymore. It was a person with a family, with dreams, with a specific laugh and favorite foods and memories of home. The humans carried the weight of these individual losses, and now I carried it too. It was crushing me, but I couldn't let it go. I decided to end my observation mission, not because I had gathered insufficient data, but because I had gathered too much. I had seen things that would change me forever, witnessed a species that defied every analytical model I had been taught. I needed to report to the Council, to warn them that humans were not like other species. They were more dangerous than the Drokan, not because of their weapons or tactics, but because of their capacity for sacrifice. They would pay any price, endure any suffering if they believed the cause was just. But before I left, I made one final decision that violated every protocol of my mission. I decloaked my observation ship and approached the Defiant. I sent a communication request directly to Captain Chen. It took her several minutes to respond, probably because she was trying to understand how an unknown vessel had been watching them for months. When her face appeared on my screen, I saw the exhaustion in her eyes. the weight of command that had aged her beyond her years. I introduced myself, explained my mission, and apologized for observing without permission. She listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she asked a single question. She asked if I understood now. I told her I didn't, not fully, but that I was trying to. She smiled at that, a sad smile that didn't reach her eyes. She said that most humans didn't fully understand either. They just did what they thought was right and hoped it was enough. I asked her the question that had been haunting me for months. I asked how they kept going, how they endured the losses and the pain and the constant weight of impossible choices. She was quiet for a long time, staring at something off-screen. Then she said that they kept going because the alternative was letting others suffer. She said that every human who died had believed in something worth dying for, and honoring that belief meant continuing to fight. She said they carried the dead with them, remembered their names, and tried to live in a way that justified their sacrifice. Before I ended the communication, she asked me a question that I still don't know how to answer. She asked if I would tell the council the truth about humanity, not the tactical assessments or combat evaluations, but the truth about who humans were and what they were capable of. She said the galaxy needed to understand that humans weren't conquerors or warriors by nature. They were gardeners and artists and teachers who had learned to fight because the universe demanded it. I promised I would try. Then I disengaged my ship and set course for Zenthari space. The journey home took 3 weeks. I didn't sleep once during the entire trip. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces of the dead, the crew of the Valiant, Sarah Rodriguez and her contractors on the Phoenix, the 37 crew members from the Defiant's last battle. Thousands of humans who had died during my observation, each one a specific individual that I could no longer dismiss as mere data. When I arrived at the council headquarters, I submitted my formal report. It was over 3,000 pages long, filled with tactical analysis, psychological profiles, and strategic assessments. I concluded that humans were the most dangerous species in the galaxy, not because of their technology or aggression, but because they couldn't be defeated through normal means. You couldn't break their will by destroying their ships. You couldn't terrorize them into submission by killing their civilians. Every loss only made them more determined, more focused, more dangerous. But I also included something unprecedented in an observer's report. I included personal testimony. I described what I had witnessed, not just the battles, but the humanity between them. The singing before combat, the mourning after victory, the way they valued strangers enough to die for them. I warned the council that any species who fought humans needed to understand they weren't fighting an army. They were fighting an idea, a belief that certain things were worth any cost, and ideas were impossible to kill. The council reviewed my report with what I can only describe as disbelief. Several members suggested I had been compromised, that my observations had affected my analytical objectivity. They were right, of course. I had been compromised. I had lost my ability to observe without feeling, to record without caring. The humans had broken something in me that could never be repaired. They had taught me empathy, and it was destroying me. My final recommendation to the council was simple. Accept humanity's application for full membership immediately. Not because they were strong, though they were. Not because they were useful allies, though they would be. But because any species capable of such sacrifice, such compassion in the face of horror, deserved recognition and respect. The galaxy needed more humans, not fewer. We needed their stubborn refusal to accept injustice, their willingness to fight for strangers, their capacity to endure suffering without losing their humanity. The council rejected my recommendation. They said humans were too unpredictable, too emotional, too dangerous to integrate fully into galactic society. They needed more time, more observation, more data. They wanted to send another observer, someone who could remain objective. I told them it was impossible. Anyone who truly observed humanity would be changed by it. That was simply the nature of humans. They didn't just fight your body or your ships. They fought your assumptions, your cynicism, your comfortable detachment from suffering. I resigned from the Zenthari Observer Corps after my report was rejected. I couldn't return to the analytical detachment my species valued so highly. The humans had ruined me for that kind of work. Now I spend my days writing, trying to explain to other species what I witnessed, trying to make them understand that humanity's greatest weapon isn't their technology or their tactics. It's their refusal to become the monsters that war tries to make them. I still don't sleep at night. I see the faces of the dead, Hear the songs they sang before battle. Remember the way they faced death with courage and humanity intact. Captain Chen was right when she said humans carry their dead with them. Now I carry them too. Every human who died during my observation has become part of me. Their sacrifice seared into my memory where I can never forget or dismiss them. Sometimes I wonder if this is what it means to be human. To carry the weight of others' pain. To remember the fallen. To keep fighting even when you're broken inside because someone has to stand against the darkness. If so, then perhaps the humans have succeeded in their mission more than they realize. They haven't just defended their worlds or